Hi everyone and welcome to this week's video. This week is going to be all about one of my absolutely favourite flowers, which is called Nigella, also known as Love in a Mist. And it is a fantastic cut flower to grow. It's super easy, it's reliable, it has the most amazing flowers on it, and then added bonus of those fantastic seed pods after it's finished flowering. So today we're going to look at the whole process of how I grow Nigella, right through from seed sowing to planting it out in the garden to harvesting it and using it in arrangements. And I hope by the end of the video you are as much in love with Nigella and all the different varieties as I am, and you're super excited about trying to grow it in your own gardens or on your own flower farms. So first of all, Nigella, why should you grow it? And there's a few different good reasons out there, but the first one is just to be wowed by those amazing flowers. So as I talk you through why you should grow Nigella, have a look at some of the footage of some of the flowers that have bloomed in my garden, and I think that'll be enough to convince you that Nigella is a great flower to grow. So Nigella is an absolutely fantastic flower to grow, and it is fantastic as a cut flower that you can use in arrangements, but it's also a really great flower just to have in your gardens, in your borders. And it comes in a variety of different colours, so it comes in whites and it comes in light blues and dark deep blues, and it comes in rose pink colours as well. And they're really just so unique to look at. I don't think I've ever seen a flower quite like Nigella. Certainly hadn't heard of it until I started growing flowers. And he's got these lovely unique flowers that you can see here on top of wiry slender stems. And you would think that the stems would be really fragile, but actually, even though they're really thin, they are actually really strong. And these lovely flowers on the top, you can have lots of double petals there, and as you probably know from watching my other videos, I do like flowers with lots of double petals like this. And in the centre, once it has finished flowering, it creates this amazing seed pod. And you can use these fresh and their green stage, or you can dry them and have them everlasting in dried arrangements. So lots of fantastic reasons to grow Nigella just from what it looks like. But also it's super easy to grow as well. It's a nice easy one to start with if you haven't grown flowers before. It's very trouble-free once you've got it germinated and growing in the garden. And it also tolerates our cooler weather here in Scotland really well. It actually doesn't like really hot weather, so it's perfect for Zone 8B here in the Scottish borders. As a cut flower, it lasts well in a vase, so it'll give you a good 7 to 10 days in an arrangement, which is fantastic. And later on in the video, I'll show you Nigella and some of my arrangements, and you can see what it looks like there. So some of the varieties that I grow of Nigella include Nigella Persian Jewels mixed, and this comes in lots of whites and blues and pinks, a really pretty mix, especially if you're wanting to have it in your garden. And then I also grow particular colours, so I grow Miss Jekyll Love in a Mist, which is a nice light pale blue one. I grow Nigella Miss Jekyll Dark Blue, which is a much darker shade of blue. And I also grow a lot of Miss Jekyll White, especially for using in some of my wedding work. And then another one that I found that I really like is Nigella Mulberry Rose, which is a lovely pink colour, and you can see it here in an arrangement that I've made. So now we know why to grow Nigella, fantastic flower, but how do we grow it from seed? When should we be doing this in the year? How easy is it? Let's go and have a look in the greenhouse. So Nigella, as you can see here, are fairly good sized seeds, good enough that you can handle them fairly easy for individual sowing and spacing them out when you do it. Now Nigella you can sow at a few different times of year. If you just sowed Nigella once in the springtime, it's fairly short-lived in its flowering, so you would just get flowers for a short period of time. So in order to try and get Nigella flowers all the way through from May to September, we need to succession sow it. So because Nigella is fairly tolerant of coolish temperatures, if you don't have really harsh winters, you should be able to overwinter it and get it through from an autumn sowing. Now, usually that is the case for me. I've got it through many winters. It's been fantastic flowering early for me in May. However, this year, with that minus 15 degrees in December we had, I didn't get any Nigella through this year. But it's still definitely worth having a shot at, because more often than not in a winter I will get it through. So the first time I would sow Nigella is from an autumn sowing. And then once we've got our 10 hours of daylight towards the end of February, then I'll start sowing Nigella again at that time of year. And then I'll succession sow it every 3-4 weeks, right through up until we get to about June time. And that should hopefully get me flowers all the way up to those first frosts. Now, interestingly, Nigella really doesn't like its roots being disturbed. So in an ideal world, you would sow all your Nigella seeds direct outside so that you're not having to have it pot bound or potting it on, pricking it out, which would disturb its roots. However, to manage to get Nigella to go at the very start of May flowering, it means that you're going to have to try overwintering it. And you could try doing that by direct sowing in the ground in August, September time, but you could also try overwintering some in pots. And that's what I do. So towards the start of the season, when it's not warm enough to direct sow and get germination outside, I will already have started my Nigella indoors. So just now I'm going to show you a bit of both. I'm going to show you sowing Nigella inside, and I'm also going to show you sowing Nigella direct outside. So it's now early May and the soil has warmed up enough to direct sow some Nigella. And it's also been fairly wet, so my soil is quite damp. And I'm just making some trenches with my trowel here so that we can get ready for sowing some Nigella. If it had been dry weather when I made my trench just now, I would water it so that I'm not watering from overhead after I've sown. I want to have done that first so I don't wash my seeds away. And I've got my seeds here, and I'm just going to space them out as evenly as I can down the trench. Don't worry too much if one or two are close together, because once they've germinated you can always thin them out, and you don't know that every single seed is going to germinate, so don't worry too much. Try and space them out as much as you can, but if one or two are close together, that doesn't matter too much. And then once you've got your seeds down, you just want to give it a light covering with soil, so not covering it too deeply, just enough, and then within 2 to 3 weeks you should start to see some little seedlings popping up. The main thing to do when you're direct sowing out into the garden is to make sure that you do pop a label in as well, so that you know where you have been doing your sowings. It's very easy to forget where you've put something, so just putting that label in is a good reminder of where there should be some seedlings popping up very soon. So 2 to 3 weeks later, and this is what your little Nigella seedlings should look like when they start to emerge. And now we'll go and have a look at sowing Nigella indoors if you decide you'd like to try it that way, especially at that fairly early stage in the season when it's not warm enough to get germination outside. So indoors I start off with my seed tray. That is a half seed tray full of my seed compost, which I have put in a larger seed tray full of water to soak up from underneath and be nice and damp for sowing my Nigella seeds. And then I just sow them by spacing them out as best I can in my seed tray. And because they're large enough to handle, this is fairly easy to do. Once I've spaced out my Nigella on my seed tray, I'll just take some vermiculite and I will sprinkle this over the top of my seeds to give them a light covering. And you could use seed compost if that's what you've got as well. And then I'll lightly press down with the back of my hand just to make sure the seeds are all in contact with that nice damp compost that we've got. And we don't need to water from overhead at the moment because we've already watered the seed compost from underneath. And then I'm just going to pop in a label so that I know what it is and the date, and then I'm going to pop a humidity dome over it. These are then going to sit on my heated propagating bench until they germinate. At this time of year, you maybe don't even need the heat to get started. Sometimes we're still fairly cool at the moment, so it'll just give them that extra warmth from underneath to get going. But if you're in quite a warm place at the moment, then in your greenhouse, unheated should be fine. 15 to 18 degrees and they should germinate for you. So they're not as quick to germinate as our cornflowers and our corncockles that we've looked at before, which can quite often germinate within a week, but within 2 to 3 weeks you should start to see your Nigella coming up, and this is what the tiny little seedlings with their first seed leaves should look like for you. At this stage, once you start to notice seedlings coming up, then take the humidity dome off if you have one and remove them from the heated propagating bench as well, and grow them on cooler so they don't get too leggy. So this next stage you have to be quite careful about, because Nigella can sulk if they have their roots disturbed. They really don't like it, which is why direct sowing can often be the preferred choice here. But it is doable. I've managed to get very successful plants from potting on and transplanting out into the garden. You just have to be very careful when you're doing it, not to disturb the roots, as little as you can anyway, and to give them lots of space to grow on and not keep them in their containers or their cells too long that they get pot bound. So I've got a Nigella seed tray here today that I need to start pricking out. There is a few true leaves coming on these now, and I just need to be very gentle teasing it out. Make sure that I pick it up by its seed leaves and very gently pull it up so that I'm not snapping any of those fragile roots at the bottom. And then I'm just going to make a hole in my 3-inch pot here that I can put my little transplant into. I'm just going to tuck it down. I've made the hole big enough that there's lots of room for those roots to go into without having to press it down too much and disturb them too much. And it's nice damp compost that I've pre-watered, so it should like it much more in there and have lots of room to grow. So I'm just going to continue on and potting up all of these different ones in the seed tray, and there's another example there. It's got a lovely root system on it and lovely healthy foliage starting to grow at the top of the plant as well. So it doesn't take long at this time of year for Nigella to put on some good growth, and you'll find that as soon as it starts to do this, then you'll be able to start hardening it off at this time of year, getting it used to being outside for a couple of hours each day, then bringing it back in and gradually increasing the length of time that it's outside. So if you do this for a good week, 10 days before you plant it out, then your Nigella will be used to the outdoor conditions. And if you have sown it in the autumn time and overwintered it in your greenhouse, you'll find it'll put on some good growth to begin with, and then it'll start to stall. You'll think that there's not much happening. It'll go dormant over the winter, but it will be putting down these great roots. And as soon as the spring warmth comes along, then it'll really get growing for you again. So once you've got your Nigella hardened off and it's ready to be planted outside, what's the spacing? What kind of soil does it need? Does it need feeding? Do you need to pinch it out? Do you need to support it in any way? Let's go and answer some of these questions just now in the garden. So out in the garden, Nigella will put on some growth fairly quickly, and this is an example of ones that have been out over the winter. They've been direct sown in the autumn, they've managed to do all right over the winter, and they've suddenly got going. So these are all at the stage where you can start to see some buds coming. Now, Nigella out in the garden, it has got strong little wiry stems on it, but it can grow to 45-50 centimetres in height, and it can get blown over by the wind. So a good thing to do is to provide some support. So I've got my tree stakes here down the bed and some horizontal pea and bean netting for support, and it just grows up through that. And that just helps if there's any windy weather, it won't knock those lovely Nigella over. It's good to get that in early if you can, before the plants have got too big. It's easy to harvest through as well because it is just slim wiry stems that you're cutting, so you shouldn't have too much problems being able to get it through the horizontal pea and bean netting. In terms of spacing out your plants, Nigella are fairly small plants. They're not going to bush out hugely, so you can space them fairly close together. So you can space them about 6 inches apart if you're using them as a cut flower. So that's about 15 centimetres apart. If you're growing them just in your garden, you might want to space them a bit more. You could do it up to as much as 9 inches apart, about 23 centimetres. In terms of soil for Nigella, they like a really nice, well-draining soil, so anything that's really waterlogged and clay, they're not going to thrive in that well. If you've got any soil like this and you want to grow Nigella, it's probably worth adding a bit of grit to it. So they do quite well in sandy soils, gravelly areas as well, but anything free-draining is good for Nigella. And Nigella also like a good amount of sunshine, so if you've got full sun, then that's ideal for Nigella too. Although they don't like really hot weather, they are a cool hardy annual, and so they do prefer more moderate temperatures. Anything in the late 20s they're not going to be hugely tolerant of, so they'll flower best in slightly cooler weather. Which is why they're excellent for growing in Scotland, because we very rarely get into the late 20s here, even on our best summer days. In terms of feeding Nigella, you don't need to feed Nigella. In fact, if you had a very nutrient-rich soil, then they're more likely to put on lots of foliage and green leafy growth rather than effort into flowering. So you might get fewer flowers if it was a very nutrient-rich soil. So it doesn't matter if it's a slightly poorer soil, and you don't need to feed Nigella. You also don't need to pinch Nigella out either, that's not necessary for it. And the other thing to remember is that you do need to succession sow your Nigella. So if you're wanting to get your flowers all through the season, then start it off with an autumn sowing for May flowers the following year. Then do some late winter, early spring sowings for getting your flowers in June into July, and then repeat batches every month until you get to about mid-June time, and that will hopefully give you flowers right through into August and September as well. The other thing to say is that Nigella do have these wonderful seed pods that contain many seeds at the end of flowering, and they will crack open and they will disperse these seeds all over your garden, your flower beds, and you will get Nigella popping up here, there and everywhere. And also you will not be guaranteed the same colour of Nigella that you had when you were planting it. So if you don't want self-seeded Nigella all over your garden, you do have to deadhead as you go along with the flowers, and definitely cut the seed pods down before they ripen and split open at the end of the season. But you might be very happy that that's what they do. It might save you in terms of sowing your seeds each year. You know that you're going to get Nigella coming back for you, and if you're not concerned about exact precise colours, you're just happy to have a mixture, then that would work well for you. But it's just to bear in mind that it is a good self-seeder and that you will get Nigella popping up in different places. If the soil is dry in the summer, you might want to give your Nigella a water. Keeping the soil nice and moist will help with a longer stem length, which is good for cutting. So harvesting Nigella, let's go and have a look at how to harvest and condition Nigella, and then we'll be able to have a look at it in some lovely flower arrangements. So Nigella are really easy when it comes to harvesting. They don't require any special conditioning. So you can just cut them, pop them into a bucket of water, leave them to soak up that moisture, ideally overnight, but at least for a few hours before arranging, and then you're ready to go. And in terms of stages to harvest at, you want the flowers to have opened up and you want them to have their full colour on them, but you don't want them to be getting to the stage where the petals are falling. So when they're newly opened is when you want to be harvesting them for the vase. And then they will last a good week for you, even up to 10 days. Once all the petals have dropped and the seed pod has formed and it's nice and green, you can cut this and use it in arranging as well. I've done this a lot and I love using it in buttonholes at weddings. And you can then dry the seed pods as well. You can store them upside down in the house in a dry place for a couple of weeks, and then they'll last indefinitely in dried flower arrangements for you. So as you can see here, Nigella has featured a lot in many of the buckets that I have given to florists for wholesale flowers, and also for DIY buckets for wedding flowers going off to brides as well. And they really do mix really well with all sorts of different flowers. And they can have some really nice long stems on them, which are really usable in bouquets and large arrangements. So it's just getting them well watered in the garden to get that nice long stem length on them. So Nigella, fantastic flower to use in arrangements. I use it in wedding work, I use it in bouquets, I use it in my jam jar arrangements. But first of all, let's have a little look at some of the Nigella that goes into jars of flowers on my garden gate stall. So look at this lovely dark blue Miss Jekyll Nigella there, in with the cornflowers and the Sweet William on a jar on the stall. Here you can see that lovely white Miss Jekyll Nigella down there on the left hand side, in amongst that lovely double click cranberries, cosmos, and some white dahlias as well, and again with some cornflowers. So this is an example of a jar of flowers on the stall in August time. And to get Nigella to go into these jars with those lovely dahlias and cosmos, I would have had to have sown these seeds in April time. So if I'd sown them in the autumn or I'd sown them in the early winter, the Nigella would have finished flowering by that stage. So that's why you need to keep succession sowing. And this is an example in comparison of Nigella that's coming from those earlier sowings. So this is coming from Nigella has been autumn sown and then overwintered, and then it's flowering in early June with the first of the other annuals, the cornflowers and the sweet peas, but it's also still got the anemones on the go and the hesperus, so that tells us that it is a June jar on the stall. And here's an example where you can start to see some different colours of Nigella. So if you look down on the left hand side at the front and the right there, you can see a darker pink and a lighter pink. And you can get these in the Persian Jewels mix, and you can also get them from sowing Mulberry Rose as well. So coming up, I'm just going to show you a few of my jar arrangements that I have had to make to order. And I love making these because when you get an order in to make a jar of flowers up, you can go out into the garden and you can see what's flowering and you can choose absolute best things that you can see out there on the day to go in it. And I grow lots of different varieties so that people get a real mixture of seasonal, beautiful flowers, often scented, full of texture, different things going on in the jar, and that's a talking point and something that makes people think of their own gardens, and it brings back memories as well. And Nigella is a big part of that, so let's have a look at some orders that I've made up. So I hope you enjoy seeing all the jar arrangements where you can see what I am mixing Nigella in with to create some really stunning arrangements. In this case, it's a summer jar where I have been able to use those dark blue Jekyll Nigella in with Phacelia and some squirrel's tail grass and cornflowers and lady's mantle and sweet William and Arlea. So a really lovely summer mix of all sorts of different flowers there in that order. So this was an order for 4 posies in different colour schemes, and you can see that you can use Nigella to a great effect with lots of different colours here. So I've got white Nigella in with a pink theme with the pink cornflowers, and I've got white Nigella in with a more purple theme, and then blue Nigella in with the bluer bouquet, and a white Nigella in with the white theme. Can you see the lovely pale blue Nigella in this arrangement? We've got some down there at the front and some on the right hand side, and they're in with some lovely Orlea and purple corncockles and blue irises, and the first lady's mantle and some Gypsophila Convent Garden as well. So this is a nice June arrangement here. This is a lovely June jar where I've mixed in some blue Nigella with white Orlea and white ranunculus and some grasses in there. You can see some squirrel tail grass in at the back, some Gypsophila Convent Garden, and mixing in with the perennials too with the Astrantia. I love making this jar up because it was just a sign that summer had come, all my annuals were coming out. We had scent from the sweet peas, we had the cornflowers, the corncockles, the Nigella, all coming out together, and it was just a lovely array of colours. Some paler blue Nigella are mixed in here with some Alstroemeria, and we've got some cornflower still, lady's mantle, so nice July arrangement this one. Just look at the white Nigella in this arrangement. They're just absolutely stunning. One of my absolute favourite flowers to use. So different colours in this one. We've got some black ball cornflowers in there. We've got some perennial scabious, and we've got that lovely white Nigella setting off that lovely green eryngium down there as well. This jar arrangement just makes me think summer. It's just got lovely colours in it, and you can see those blue Nigella dotted all around the arrangement there with the sweet William and the Kilwye daisies and the pink cornflowers. This arrangement's got that lovely deep dark blue Miss Jekyll Nigella in it there at the front on the right hand side, and it's just such a lovely deep colour. So hopefully you can see that Nigella really does go with so many different flowers, whether it's early in the season with anemones and ranunculus and irises, right through to the end of the season when you've got dahlias and cosmos and scabious. There's just so much versatility with Nigella. It's got different colours. It can just pop into all these jar arrangements and bouquets and just look absolutely fabulous. Here's some alliums in with this Nigella in this one here, and some Canterbury bells as well, and some snapdragons. You can see some Daucus in there at the front and some pink mallow. And down there on the left hand side at the front, can you see that lovely seed pod as well that is from the Nigella after it's finished flowering. And look at those lovely Mulberry Rose Nigella down there at the front of this arrangement. I didn't know that you could get Nigella that came in a pink colour when I first started growing it, and it's really very pretty. I think when you use the blues against whites and pinks, then it makes an arrangement really pop and come to life. It definitely gives it something a little bit different. Quite often florists as well ask for blue colours for their arrangements, and Nigella is one of those flowers that you know is going to be a true blue. There's not that many flowers that you can think of that are a proper blue colour that you can grow as a flower farmer. So in bouquets, Nigella aren't the focal flowers, but I think because they're so unique, they certainly pop in a bouquet and you can certainly see them. They're not getting lost in it. Your eye is definitely drawn to them, even though there might be larger flowers such as the cosmos and roses in it. So your Nigella in a bouquet will last a good week at home, so lots of time to enjoy it. And here's another bouquet where you can just see that white Nigella there next to the cornflowers and the Daucus at the front. This Nigella here is just sitting beside the Phacelia and the purple cornflowers, and there's a good contrast between the two of them there. And then this lovely bouquet here, we've got our Nigella, some white and some blue Nigella, and they're sitting in there with some lovely feverfew and Achillea the Pearl and some dahlias, campanula and phlox, lots of different things mixed into this bouquet. So one of the things that I found you could do really well with Nigella is that you can also press it and dry it really well, and then you can use it to make greetings cards with. And they just were fabulous in this. I didn't realise that they would press quite so well, but they do. And so here's a couple of examples of some of the greetings cards that I've made. You can see that lovely dark blue Nigella down there at the bottom. So that was Miss Jekyll Dark Blue that you saw there that pressed nicely, but also this lighter blue Nigella also does really well when it's pressed. And you can see it there with the Ami Magus and the cornflowers. And this is another example where it's another light blue Nigella that's sitting really nicely with the astrantia and cornflowers here on that nice ferny foliage. So over the last several years, Nigella has featured in a lot of my summer wedding flowers. So here's a little peek at some of the bouquets and buttonholes that I have made up with Nigella. So Nigella is a real talking point in wedding flowers because it is so unusual, and I've loved using it in flowers for weddings, whether that's a May one or whether that's an October one. You can usually, if you've done your succession sewing, you can get them at the right time of year for you. And this one here is a lovely summer wedding that had lots of bridesmaid bouquets that all had Nigella in them, as you can see there. This one was another summer wedding one where we've got lovely feverfew and cornflowers and astilbe, and we've got those white Nigella you can see up on the top left hand side there, and they're tucked all the way around the bouquet. And this is where growing white Nigella really comes in useful, because there's so many wedding bouquets that you can put Nigella in with, especially if there are pastel shades of bouquets, which a lot of brides have been going for over the last few years. You can see some white Nigella down there at the front of this bouquet as well, with all sorts of other flowers in it. You can see the daucus there as well. You can see that there's some larkspur, there's some astilbe, some eryngium in there, some statice. So this is a nice August wedding bouquet. This one's a lovely one. It's got some lady's mantle, it's got some mallow in it, it's got some astrantia, some oralea, and you can see the white nigella there as well. This bouquet's got lovely roses and some cosmos, some hypericum berries, some yarrow there, some marjoram for some scent, and those lovely white nigella as well. So this is again later in the year. We've got the hypericum berries out at this stage and the marjoram out. And we've got some lovely cosmos in there as well, and some hare's tail bunny grass. This nice bouquet's got some pink cosmos and it's got some yarrow. Ami Mad just sets off the nigella really nicely in this one too. Some light pink astilbe in this one. And you can see the nice white cosmos purity just underneath the white nigella there. This one's a lovely July wedding. It's got some lovely white nigella in there with some white cosmos, white scabious, beautiful feverfew daisies in it. This is one of my favourite ever bouquets I made. I love the textures from the squirrel tail grass in it. I love the phacelia, the white nigella. It was a really pretty bouquet to make. I've used some ferns in this for foliage. Some hare's tail grass as well there, some purple cornflowers. This one's a lovely one. It's a pink and white theme, so the pink cosmos and the white nigella go really, really well together. So pretty. So I always condition my nigella overnight in buckets of cool water, and then it's ready for arranging in wedding bouquets, and it'll hold up really well in them. So I do use nigella in buttonholes. It holds up really well if I've given it a good condition in water overnight. I do tend to wire my nigella if I'm using it in buttonholes, just so that I can manoeuvre it into a good place to sit in the buttonhole to be seen at the greatest effect. I don't always have to wire a buttonhole if I've got sturdier material, but nigella I do feel needs wiring. And it looks absolutely lovely in buttonholes next to the rosemary and the heather and the sweet william and the cornflowers. And if you have a look in these buttonholes here, I have actually used the nigella seed pods. You can see on the left hand side there's a nigella seed pod, and on the right hand side on the lady's corsage there's a nigella flower. And those seed pods are wonderful to use in buttonholes. So you can just cut them at the green stage in the garden. And here you go, you can see another nigella seed pod on the left hand side there. Just adds a wow factor to a buttonhole, I think. And this was a favourite buttonhole I made, a buttonhole for my husband when we went to a family wedding, and the star of the show there is that lovely nigella on the left hand side that you can see. So here's a summary of what we've talked about so far today. So nigella is a super easy flower to grow from seed. It's got a good seed size for spacing them out in your seed tray or outside in your garden. They are best sown direct because they don't like their roots being disturbed. But I have successfully grown them indoors, and this is especially useful at the start of your season in late winter, early spring when it's not warm enough to germinate outside, or if you're wanting to overwinter some in your greenhouse from an autumn sowing. And as long as you are careful when you're potting them on and don't let them stay too long in their pots, then they should transplant successfully for you. It is quite a short-lived flowering period with nigella, so you do need to succession sow in order to have flowers right the way through the season from May up until your first frost. So a good idea is to sow it every 3 to 4 weeks. The spacing for nigella can be fairly close together outside. They're not really large plants. They don't take up a huge spread. So spacing can be 6 inches for cut flowers. And they are also not fussy on the soil type as long as it's well drained, but they actually don't like too nutrient rich soil because then you'll get lots of green leafy growth and fewer flowers, so you don't need to feed them at all. They do like a nice sunny position though. They are flowers on thin stems that can grow to a height of about 50 centimetres, so you do need to give them some support, and I use stakes and pea and bean netting for this, and they can grow up through the netting. When you're harvesting Nigella, you want the flowers to be open and you want them to have some colour on them as well, but newly open. You don't want to leave them too long when they're about to drop their petals. So look for the buds opening up and then cut them at that newly open stage. And they just need conditioning in water for a few hours or overnight. They don't need any other special measures for conditioning. And the vase life should be about 7 to 10 days, especially if you change the water frequently. And then those marvellous seed pods, if you cut them when they're green and you dry them upside down indoors for a couple of weeks, they will last indefinitely in dried flower arrangements. Just be careful with Nigella at the end of its flowering, because once those seed pods have opened up, they will spread seed and disperse it over your garden, and it will pop up with little seedlings all over the place the following year, which is great if you're happy to have self-seeded Nigella everywhere. But if you're wanting to control it growing and you want guaranteed colours, then you need to make sure that you're deadheading as the flowers finish. So a super fantastic cut flower to grow, and the added bonus of those wonderful seed pods at the end of flowering as well. And also a flower that really does well for me here in Scotland in Zone 8B, where we have very mild climate and not searing hot weather in the summer, which suits Nigella perfectly, especially when you're succession sowing it. It will continue to flower throughout the whole season for you. Thanks so much for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed finding out about one of my favourite cut flower varieties. Nigella is a superstar in the garden, and it's easy to grow, and you can get so much joy from growing it and putting it into arrangements. Super good flower, and I love those seed pods as well. So I hope that you're as excited about it as I am, and that you're wanting to go off and try growing it for the first time maybe, or maybe you've seen a different variety today and you want to go and try that. Let us know how you get on with it. Have you had much success growing Nigella before? Have you got any favourite varieties? Or maybe you've had some problems growing Nigella. Let us know about them and we'll see if we can come up with some solutions for you. Next week, I'm really excited to go back and show you what's happening outside and in the greenhouse. It's been a few weeks since we have done that now, and lots have been going on. We've come out of tulip season now, and we're starting to move into the perennials starting to bloom, and also those first hardy annuals won't be too far away. A little bit later than normal at the moment because we lost the whole lot, well, a great majority of them in that December freeze, so we had to start again in late February, early March. So we're a little bit behind schedule this year, but not too far away. The sun's shining now and there's warmth out there, and that means that growth is being put on outside, and that means that we're getting there. So I'll be excited to show you that. And last week we talked about succession sowing, and so we can see how things are progressing in the greenhouse, and dahlias as well, not far away now from being planted out. Still too early in May. I don't want to be planting them out too soon. Gotta wait until that last frost date, which for me is the very last week in May. So join me then. I'll look forward to showing you around the garden and in the greenhouse next week.